The Louvre Museum in Paris houses a very special object that was assembled in France during the first half of the 12th century. Now known as the Eleanor vase, it stands a little over 13 inches tall and is made of rock crystal, gilded silver, Champlevé enamels, pearls, and precious stones. It is remarkable for the beauty and precision with which the raw materials have been transformed. Gold is crafted here into beaded filigree flowers that are soldered to the metal ground of the vase. Filigree rinceaux are set with amethysts. Enamel medallions contain the heraldic fleur-de-lis associated with the royal family of France in the Middle Ages. Significantly, it is likely that this metalwork was modified over the course of the Central Middle Ages, from the 12th to the 13th to the 14th century. For the Eleanor vase is a composite object, one that changed form and function over time. Its core is a rock crystal vase. Rock crystal is a mineral. Therefore, it was mined from the ground and then carved. This carving features a delicate pattern of concave hexagons. At the very bottom of the metalwork base, there is a Latin inscription, written in a material known as niello. The inscription records some of the different people who owned the rock crystal vessel. It reads in translation, "As a bride, Eleanor gave this vase to King Louis, Mithridates to her grandfather, the king to me, and Suger to the saints." Such inscriptions are unusual in medieval art, so this is valuable testimony to the way that objects were gifted from one owner to another in this period. It tells us that at one time the vase was owned by somebody called Mithridates. He then gave it to Eleanor's grandfather. He gave it to her, she gave it to King Louis, and King Louis gave it to Suger. What do we know about these 5 different people? Significantly, the first name mentioned in the inscription is that of Eleanor. This is Eleanor of Aquitaine, who married King Louis VII of France in 1137. Eleanor is one of the best-known women of the Middle Ages. As Duchess of Aquitaine, she was one of the wealthiest women in Europe and was thus wed to the King of France. Their marriage was annulled after 15 years with no male heir being born. Eleanor then went on to marry King Henry II of England. Together, they had 8 children, 5 of them boys. She died in 1204, probably around the age of 80. Here, you see her tomb of painted stone, which to this day survives in France at the monastery of Fontevraud. Eleanor has entered into the popular imagination in a variety of ways. On film, she's been portrayed by both Katharine Hepburn and Glenn Close in movie versions of The Lion in Winter, which tells the story of Henry II of England, his marriage to Eleanor, and the king's fractured relationship with his sons. The film versions, in turn, were based on a play of the same name, which debuted on Broadway in 1966. Eleanor is equally popular among historians. If you look online, you can find countless books inspired by her life. Here are the covers of just 6. Eleanor's grandfather was William IX, Duke of Aquitaine, a region in France. He also owned the rock crystal vessel and apparently received it from the person named Mithridates. It was William who gave the vase to his granddaughter Eleanor, who then gave it to Louis VII, perhaps as a wedding gift. The king then gave it to Suger, a monk who was the leader or abbot of a monastery known as Saint-Denis. Suger, who had a keen interest in ancient objects, took the rock crystal vessel and had the metalwork added so that it could be used as a liturgical vessel at his monastery. When and where the rock crystal vessel was carved remains a matter of debate, but most recently it has been argued that its honeycomb faceting points to Iran, perhaps in the 6th or 7th century AD. It has also been argued that the Mithridates mentioned in the inscription is a Latinized reference to Abd al-Malik, the Muslim ruler of various parts of the kingdom of Saragossa in Spain from the year 1110 until his death in 1130. Mithridates is perhaps a poorly spelled version of his Arabic nickname, Imad al-Dawla, which means column of the dynasty. Abd al-Malik had fought as an ally with William of Aquitaine in 1120, when the North African Muslim dynasty known as the Almoravids were defeated in an attempt to capture the city of Saragossa. Thus, the inscription at the base of the vase documents a chain of gift-giving, with one elite giving it to the next as a way of creating social bonds. Within a generation or so, the object changed hands 4 times, until reaching the monastery of Saint-Denis, probably sometime in the 1140s. It was at that point that Abbot Suger added the metalwork and the inscription. The inscription gives voice to Suger's sense of ownership of the object, his intimate familiarity with its history, and its pride in its pedigree. Suger may have recognized that the carving of the rock crystal was centuries old by this time. Other old objects, especially classical ones, are documented as being in the Saint-Denis treasury in this period. Because of this, it's possible that Suger might have thought of the vase as an impressive Muslim object, or possibly an ancient Roman object, or he may have admired it simply as a piece of carved crystal worthy of enhancement and use. We can't know for sure. Almost certainly, however, Suger would have been drawn to the material of rock crystal. Medieval writers believed that rock crystal was a form of ice, hardened in extreme conditions, and found underground. The material was extolled for its purity, making it an appropriate material for use in the liturgy, even though this particular piece may have had non-Christian origins. These notions were widespread among clergy in the Central Middle Ages. Rock crystal vessels, sometimes of Islamic origins, can be found at Suger's monastery of Saint-Denis and in other medieval church treasuries. Therefore, it might be argued that both the crystal's materiality and its history were of central importance to its transformation and repurposing in the 12th century. After the crystal itself was unearthed and carved into something functional and beautiful, its potentiality was transformed and then played out over the centuries in a series of key moments, some of which we can identify as it was gifted from owner to owner until it was remounted for use at Saint-Denis. Materiality and temporality intertwine here in the object's history and significance. Along this line of thinking, other materials used in the creation of the vase might have been meaningful to the monks at Saint-Denis in the 12th century. For example, one medieval writer asserts claims that pearls are made from celestial dew. The striking use of doubled pearls here might have signified an otherworldly splendor in this period. It should be noted at this point that other objects from the monastery of Saint-Denis were subject to similar transformations. One example is now known as the eagle vase. The vessel at its core is made of porphyry, a hard purplish stone that was popular in the ancient era. This particular porphyry vessel is thought to be from ancient Rome or ancient Egypt. The goldwork was, as with the Eleanor vase, added at Saint-Denis. The Latin inscription on the neck reads in translation, "This stone deserves to be enclosed in gems and gold. It was marble, but in these settings it is more precious than marble." Porphyry was classed as a type of marble by medieval writers. The inscription argues that the stone was elevated by the metalwork around it. It thus became suitable for use during the Mass. Finally, it should be pointed out that the monastery of Saint-Denis was one of the most important religious institutions in France at this time, and that its leader, Abbot Suger, was one of the most powerful churchmen of his era. Situated just outside Paris, the monastery can trace its roots to the first half of the 7th century, when it was founded by the then King of France, whose name was Dagobert. From there, it became common for French kings to be buried here, a practice which lasted until the French Revolution in the 18th century. Abbot Suger, who repurposed the Eleanor vase in the 12th century, is also remembered today for his project to rebuild the monastery's church. Parts of that rebuilding survive and are generally considered to be the first example of Gothic architecture in Europe. In this way of thinking, the Eleanor vase can be seen as both a symbol of royal power in that it was owned by the King and Queen of France, and as a symbol of church power. It spent several hundred years in the treasury of one of the most powerful monasteries in the history of Christianity. A site remembered today for its architecture, its art objects, and the people who made it one of the great centers of power in medieval Europe.